Welcome to History Through Fiction, the podcast. I'm your host, Colin Mustful, and today I am delighted to be joined by Margaret Pinard, author of the novel Orla Rafferty Seeks Her Fortune. Margaret, hello.
Hello, Colin. Thank you so much for having me. This is great. Nice to meet you.
Yeah, I'm really excited to talk to you today. I have a lot of questions, not just about your novel, but about everything else you're doing on your various platforms. So we're definitely going to get into all that. But let's start with the novel and Orla Rafferty. Who is she and what are the circumstances of her life?
Yes. So, Orla Rafferty, she's my seventh novel baby, my main character. And I was looking for another historical fiction piece of time that I could dive into that would give me lots of material about reform and sort of the world changing and everything in upheaval. Because what I like to do in my historical fiction is reflect our times. And so, um, I'm setting this in the 1830s, and Orla is the daughter of an immigrant. So, after a failed Irish rebellion, a lot of Irish folks dispersed. And so, I'm looking to Glasgow as an industrializing town in the 1830s, and her as a widow, as a sort of prism to see a lot of the changes happening. And yeah, she's my first character, but I hope to have a couple others, her family members, who are seeing things from a different perspective to give a little view of what's happening there.
And set the stage for us a little bit. What's the political context, and what's the state of women's rights in Scotland at that time, and what does Orla need to fight for?
So, I made her a widow because that is a position of a little bit more privilege than a single woman, right? And so I wanted to explore what an independent woman would be able to do in that time. Scotland wouldn't be too different from the greater island of Britain. So just to make things a little simpler, women were still considered property of their husbands. They were covered couverture, like they had no rights, could own no property. And the big movement that has just happened the couple years before our story starts is the Reform Bill. So you had the Prince Regent finally becoming king, the cabinet changing, the bill going through to reform, and then a lot of more men being able to vote. So that's the first like rock falling down the hill in the story. And what's going to proceed after that is abolition. And and in another one of the character stories, we're going to see a little bit about Catholic emancipation and how that was, because that was before. So I'm going to hop around a little bit to show like people's backstories and different, as I say, angles of the prism. But as a woman traveling and doing business and just walking through the world is a different experience than you would get from primary materials, which are mostly written by men. So I wanted to see her take on those and her sort of seizing of her destiny, seeking her fortune. She's going to learn about money being made and trade and banking and some of those things that are happening. So I gave her a little stake in that.
Can you expand on that a little bit? What you just explained can be a little dry, a little complicated when you get into the political minutia of things. How are you able to show the readers these very real circumstances without bogging them down with too much information and kind of making it an engaging story?
Yeah. So literacy is the first step in getting power for your station, right? So when she grew up, she was not literate. When she got married, she got to learn a little bit more about reading and learning about the world. But when she's a widow is when she decides, I'm going to put that to use. I'm going to join a lending library. She meets a librarian. She goes to lectures. She starts to hear about what's happening elsewhere in the empire. And so the friends that she's making, the old friends that she's reconsidering her relationships with, and her family that she's renegotiating her relationships with are all going to shed different viewpoints on whether that's a good or a bad thing. And then she has other things happen to her because as she gets involved and learns more about the political process, um, like the unstamped press and how she can affect or help the people changing things, she is putting herself at risk. So whenever you stick your neck out, you are accruing a little bit more danger. So there's a little bit of action in the book as well because of that. And, people who pop up and become allies in that fight. And so that makes it a little bit more um, personal and intimate and exciting than, my bank history of Scotland would be to to impart to readers.
Did I hear you say that when she got married, she got to learn how to read, so she didn't have that right until she was married?
Oh, it wasn't a right. It was because of her circumstances. Like girls were not sent to school, they were considered too
Uh-huh.
valuable as workers, things like that. So she was working at the manse as a servant and was not literate. And then when she married this curate, as you heard, oh, as you haven't heard, you may have to cut that out. As she married the curate in the church and they got to traveling, I made him a very kind-hearted man. And so he helped her learning, reading, and like numeracy, um, so that she would be able to do some of the householding tasks and things like that. So I gave her like a little notch up on the ladder in that way.
Hmm. I think that's one of the just great advantages of historical fiction is bringing us back to those circumstances. It's so easy to take that for granted, what we have, and
Yeah.
just learning those things in kindergarten, first grade, second grade. So it's very interesting to hear you kind of explain all that.
Mm.
Your author's note, you talk about writing more real historical figures than you have in the past, but then you also say you had to take some artistic liberties in order to make a narrative out of it. Can you talk about that part of your craft?
Yeah. So I don't take anyone who's very well known, right? But they are names that I come across and I realize they had a key part to play in the movement, the reform movement or the Chartist movement, which is what really inspired some of this research. So not many people in America know about Chartism. It was a movement in the 1830s and 40s, and then just sort of petered out, right? So it would be kind of like learning about the Tea Party and 100 years from now. But the Chartists were about a charter, so wanting an update to the list of freedoms that British citizens could count as theirs. And it was about power, it was about classism, it was about negotiating these rights. And one of the figures that popped up was James Bronte O'Brien. And he's from Ireland, comes over to London, gets involved as a journalist, as an editor, as a writer, seems to be harrowing and scaring about, talking to people in fields, just like some of the other speakers. And I thought that he was a good sort of model for a developing character. Like he's not famous yet, but in this story, it's a few years before he's got his idea to run with. And so I made him with this blank period of his life that we don't know much about. I made him a good sounding board and sort of a lightning rod for my fictional main character. And yeah, so we don't know that about him, and I don't know that like people will be up in arms about taking liberties. But I did want to make it clear, like my lines are that if I change date to make something um, affect the story, I will tell you about it in the author's note so that you don't have incorrect history and it's not misinformation. But if it's something that we don't know about their personal history or their family life, then I just say, well, I just made it up because it could be true. Who knows? I just wanted this to be part of what people might get excited about and look for more information about after reading Orla.
Yeah, or during. I do that all the time. I'm Googling things.
Yes, me too.
Uh, well, let's get to know you a little bit. In your bio, you talk about traveling a lot before writing. Was that always your intention to travel so that you could write, or did it something that happened organically?
Yeah. No, I was traveling because I love to travel and learn about different places and languages and histories. I was originally studying and planning to be in a career for international development. And that means like learning some economics, learning different languages, learning about the UN, right? So it's a far cry from writing. But when I got a few years under my belt and became a little bit disenchanted with the system, I thought, okay, what else can I do that I love that also takes into account these same things that I love to do? So, sort of parlaying this skill set and this way of thinking into a new career. And so that's when I decided, oh, okay, I still love to travel. I still love to learn about history and the mechanisms of culture. And so I thought, historical fiction, I think that's a good place for me to land. I love reading it, and especially the British Empire in the 19th century has affected a lot of politics in the world, positively, negatively. I'll leave the ratio of that up to the readers. But yeah, some of like the origins of our discontent, I feel like poking at those would be useful nowadays.
And can you give us a little bit more of your journey? Obviously, it wasn't just one day you're in an international, whatever it was, and the next day you're a historical fiction writer. What was that journey like? What were some bumps and bruises, and what have been some of the rewards?
Um, so let's see. I talk about the travel that took me out of my comfort zone. So I was in Turkey for a year teaching English. I was in Ireland to get that certificate. I came back to the US to go to grad school and learn economics and international development. And then I stayed to work in Washington, D.C. for a few years. And I basically did conflict resolution and stakeholder engagement. So I got to hear about differing parties and what they were trying to get out of a negotiation in a semi neutral environment, right? And so I learned a lot in that process, and then eventually learned that I wasn't able to make a difference in that role, and I didn't see where I could go to do that. And so that's when I did a very big left turn and like left DC, came back to the West Coast, and decided that I would be an indie author. And so that's when I thought, okay, I have a lot to learn. This is starting from zero. It wasn't the complete early days of self publishing. I would say that's around 2010, and I was doing this around 2013. So it already, like, the wave had already peaked for the first adopters, and I was following in their footsteps and reading the blogs and, just deciding I'm going to experiment with this first one. And I had a draft that I had drafted while I was working in DC, and I said, "This looks, walks, sounds like a book. Let's see if we can do this." And that's what allowed me to move and start over, and yeah, cheekily think, "I can do this."
And where are you now? You have essentially your own imprint or your own press. You have the Patreon, the BookTube. How does that all kind of come together to help you write novels, share novels, continue down this career path?
Yeah, I'm actually at another inflection point, right? So 2013, 2014 is when I moved and started publishing, right? 2013 is my first book. Orla is my seventh book, so at the rate of about a book every year and a half. And I've tried lots of different things. Like I said, I started this out with an experimental mindset. So I started on Amazon Kindle because that was the only game in town. I've gone to Ingram Spark. I've gone to Draft to Digital, and I think that's where I will try to stay because of anti-monopoly reasons, which you'll find in the book as well as in my life philosophy. And as far as social media goes, I was on Twitter, I was on Facebook, I was sort of halfway doing a publicity campaign when I published. I would try a new thing every time, like a newsletter or a cover reveal or, the basic things, and try to add on and keep what worked well. And 2020, the year of our Lord 2020, pandemic year, is when I did my first sort of turn where I was like, I'm not getting much gratification from these. I'm going to try YouTube. And I went all in. And it was a slow building platform as well, but it just seemed different in the way that people engaged because they're talking to actual faces and you're live chatting, and it just felt a lot more connected rather than other places where you're scrolling, you're refreshing, and it just felt like you're in a trap, like you're the mouse in the hamster wheel or whatever the metaphor is. So that's why I stuck with it. And that's why the YouTube channel has become sort of my anchor. And after 2024, I'm kind of giving up on Facebook, giving up on Twitter because they're controlled by people who aren't aligned with my interests. And so the Patreon is a way to support my audience, my channel, my publishing, and the YouTube is the way to access my attention, right? To join in on the community. So with those two is my sort of like two legs of a stool, I guess, and then the publishing being the third leg. I feel like I want to narrow down and have people just know these are the places where Margaret is, and like I can join her there and interact and be free from the algorithms and other places. Choose your algorithm is sort of the new philosophy. Yeah.
I think that's a good strategy, especially because you hear so much advice of put your stuff out everywhere so that people can find you. You're kind of turning it around and saying this is where I am. Um, but it sounds very productive, and it sounds like you are building quite a good community there. I saw that you have something called a Good Fight Fridays. Why don't you let us know what that's all about?
Yeah, so as the newest experiment, I thought, well, this book is more directly and frankly and honestly about my concern for people's welfare and like the social experiment that is inequality and corruption and the 1%. That's all got to change, right? So I put this in the book because people have been fighting against this for a long time. Everyone deserves a chance to make it, to do more than just survive. And to me, that is what I describe as the good fight. So it's people trying to save the environment, people trying to make space for people to exist, people trying to express themselves. And the good fight is about other authors who come on my channel and I get to interview them about how they're incorporating the same sort of ideas into their fiction. So I've had romance and I've had mystery and I've had cli-fi, and it's basically all these people who I know and admire, and they've worked those things into their fiction in a different way, in a different genre, or maybe the same genre. I've had historical on as well. And so I just thought that that would be a great lead up to the release of Orla Rafferty. And so that was my, okay, let's have a speaker series. And I think I got 6 or 7 authors to do the lead up to the launch. And that was really fun. So they were great. I have a playlist. If you want to put that in the show notes, I'll give that link to you.
And how about for yourself? I mean, that's really awesome to give these authors a platform to talk about the social change that they're trying to inspire with their books. But writing a novel, writing a historical novel, is no small feat. You have to spend a lot of time at your desk doing those things. Can you talk a little bit about how your work contributes to those endeavors?
Well, that's the hard to measure part, right? So as an author, there's kind of a double track. There's the track of how are my sales doing? How are my, numbers doing? How are my mentions and sort of the analytics of it all because you're trying to get your story out into the wild. And then the other track is like, are people picking up what I'm putting down? Are people connecting with the message? And that's how are you supposed to measure that, right? So I've I've got some interviews set up. This is one of them. I'm hoping to get out to different audiences and connect with people and have them again find me where I am and want to engage in these conversations. And so one of my big new things actually that is not connected to the historical fiction series, but I just felt was something that I needed to do was the idea for a truth and reconciliation series. So this is more me inviting people to come on for conversations about things that are heavy on their heart and things that we want to change about our society. So it's much more it's much more social change focused rather than author business focused. but I want to make space for that on my YouTube channel. So I'm hoping to invite folks on and do just little agenda items where we have discussions that can vary throughout the year and hopefully do those once a month. So that's my next like push to be more honest about I really want to push this sweeping social change idea and, stepping out from the pages to do it and sort of again, if you poke your neck up, like you're going to be a little bit in more danger, but I can't not do it at this point. So
I think that's wonderful. So what are you've talked a lot here about what you're working on YouTube, Patreon, those sorts of things. But what about your next novel? I saw that you have a historical fantasy coming. You talked about some of the characters in Orla Rafferty becoming a series there. So where are you focusing your attention on your writing?
yeah, so I actually woke up this morning and was like, what if? I'm the kind of person who if you make a goal and if you say, I'm going to do this thing, my brain will go, no, you're not. I don't like deadlines. I don't like being told what to do. And so when I have to negotiate with myself about projects and the timelines to do them, sometimes deadlines work, especially when I have to hand the work over to an editor. That's a great deadline. But in terms of drafting, editing, formatting, I will often be fighting myself on these things. But this morning, I woke up with, what if? What if I dedicated January to research and then February was a readathon that I run, so I'm focusing on that. And then March was drafting month because it's a longer month. And I just sort of like plotted this and I was very firm that it's a what if. It's not a, homework and assignment. So that's my idea is that I will focus on the sequel for this next year and have enough time to make it a pub date in early 2026. So what I envisioned for it's part of a series called The Widening Gyre, if anyone is a W.B. Yeats fan, is that a couple different family members of Orla Rafferty will be joining us and showing us those different viewpoints. And so that's my project for 2025.
I've only just met you as you reached out to be on this podcast, but I am very impressed with everything that you have going, and even just hearing about your journey, I can kind of relate it a little bit to my own. My first novel I published in 2013, and it's been a lot of trial and error. Um,
Exactly.
so, what advice would you have for writers watching this who maybe are working on their first manuscript and they wanted to just write, but as you've kind of shown us, there's got to be a little bit more to it. What advice would you have for them?
Oh. I feel like the landscape is always changing, and someone entering now is going to be entering a completely different world than we did in 2013. So the things that are the same that I would recommend doing are absorbing a lot, like reading the blogs, watching the videos, getting to hear from people who have been in it a while and listen for what has worked or what they recommend, right? So immerse yourself and read nonfiction and work on the craft as well as like how do you position yourself going in. The things that have changed, um, there's a diversity in the marketplace, right? So Kindle isn't the only game in town, and I would say just like with your writer voice, you want to start out with your business voice in alignment. So for me, that means like where can you go where it's a B corporation? Where can you go where they're looking out for authors' interests instead of accruing, billions of profits? Where can you see that they have resources for folks and they have programs to design covers and that will help you experiment with things on your journey rather than charging you each point in the process and, curbing your ability to make choices. Um, so I can't think of like specific names to like go do XYZ at this point. But if I was entering now, I would go straight to draft to digital. I would, you know, pick a platform so that you can focus on one and build a following and an audience there instead of trying to do all the things and figure out the perfect system to automate because it doesn't exist unless you have a team, you know? And yeah. And in terms of writer's voice, I was just listening to who was it who was talking about writer's voice like yesterday. And again, I listened to all these different podcasts, and so like I'm trying to remember the name. um she was just talking about being authentic and having been, oh, Kathy Yardley, that's who it was. She was talking about being in the writing business for a long time, having finally allowed yourself to say, if I was just writing for me, what would I write? What do I really have to say? What is the message that I really want people to take away as part of my contribution? And if you can get to that place of confidence and say that thing, that will be your authentic voice and people will connect with it. So, in this diverse landscape, there's a niche for everyone. If you start out like what you feel you really have to say, I think you'll be starting out strong.
Oh, very good advice. I will listen back to that because I think you had a lot of insightful things there. So thank you. Well, Margaret, I just want to wrap things up here. Thank you so much for joining me. Congratulations on Orla Rafferty Seeks Her Fortune, and it's been a pleasure to talk to you.
Thank you, Colin.